So one of the really promising areas with parks and open space is the Ambrose Parks District has significant green space throughout the community. There's also opportunities with open space trails, obviously, but early on, John's previous work with GEOSYNTEC had identified Ambrose Center Park, as well as other areas along Willow Pass Road as possible opportunity sites for green infrastructure. And this sort of hits a number of goals in our different categories. It's both transit oriented, and that provides opportune connection between bike trails and Willow Pass Road, which is a major thoroughfare. It also is open space and parks, but it's also a community hub. So there's been a good amount of interest both from the community as well as Ambrose Park District in a number of meetings to potentially do a project at Ambrose Center. And so a lot of what we've been looking at is trying to, like I said before, simultaneously address flooding issues that exist on site and introduce new green infrastructure. For example, trees in parking lots, improvements to creeks and storm drains, and so on and so forth. So a lot of the challenges as we go out and we've met with some of the parks maintenance folks there as different drainage issues have occurred. And there's a lot of flooding, as I was showing in these slides before, at different parts in the park, which becomes a maintenance issue, aesthetic issues, plants die. In some cases, it's a safety issue with water in the actual sidewalk and parking lot. And so that's where we started unpacking these potential ideas of introducing bioswales that could deal with some of those flooding challenges, as well as introducing street trees that could minimize the amount of runoff and provide shading to the parking lot while not reducing the total number of parking. So I think that's really interesting opportunities to stack functions. The other really interesting opportunity we've been looking at is the edge of Ambrose Center Park also formerly functioned as a drainage, and now some of it's been channelized and put into storm drains, but it also is in disrepair and has a number of flooding issues because it used to be a drainage. So one of our ideas is, can we actually start to improve that condition, revegetate it, clean it up, and actually turn it into a functional stormwater feature. Other interesting opportunity sites that we're looking at are ANUTA Park. It actually is originally, hypothetically from our understanding, potentially designed as a stormwater retention basin for the entire neighborhood upstream of there, but was actually never integrated and designed to do as such. So one of the interesting opportunities we're looking at there is the ability to actually, in larger flood events, be able to convey water into like one corner of the park, still allowing soccer and everything else to happen, but providing essentially bioswale condition that allows for stormwater to essentially settle and infiltrate as much as possible there before it overflows downstream. So we see that as another amazing opportunity, just because it seems like the whole neighborhood has been designed for that to happen, and it may not be extremely cost effective to gain a lot of potential benefit there. So the other core area we've been looking at due to interest, both from folks that are working in the county around safe routes to schools, as well as community interest in sort of improving the transit infrastructure there, as well as a number of other planned pedestrian and bike improvement projects. One of the places we've been looking at as a sort of pilot for the community to potentially showcase some transit-oriented green infrastructure improvements would be on Willow Pass Road. So in the studies that were done previously, there's a number of drainage areas. So these larger blue areas are places where water hits, and it all flows into these street channels, and in many cases causes flooding in the area. And so Willow Pass Road, in addition to the parks, and the ones that we just showed you, the ANUTA Park and the Ambrose Center Park, there's a number of other drainages that could provide relief if we were to actually integrate green infrastructure into them. So one of the ways that that's often done on street corridors is adding bioswales or bulb outs that can both improve pedestrian crossings and also treat stormwater. And so while this is, a totally interesting, viable option, one of the things we were really thinking about again is how can we stack functions and really start to provide multi-benefits. One thing that's been impacting communities throughout the country, but obviously particularly in warmer climates in California, is the fact that in many cases we don't have bus stops or adequate infrastructure for our transit infrastructure. And places where we do have bus stops, also often they're designed, in some cases not intentionally, but to actually create a hotter environment underneath, like this one, where it can actually be more grueling without any wind flow. So we were really compelled by this. We were also compelled by research that was done a number of years ago that was showing how having trees at a bus stop not only reduces the temperature and makes it more comfortable, but it actually makes people think that they're waiting less time. So they did this interesting study where they compared places with greener environments around the bus stop to ones that were really hot and exposed, and people's perception of how long they were waiting changed dramatically. So thought that was pretty interesting. One of the things we've been looking at is, as we potentially sort of stack the functions of improving transit infrastructure, so improving these bus stop conditions and potentially adding stormwater or bioretention areas. There's a number of precedents where it's happening around the country and a lot of standards that have come out about it. There's also a lot of potential if we do this work and, for example, in this case, integrate it with the bus stop as opposed to just some sort of standalone stormwater feature, is that we could potentially integrate a bunch of bike and or pedestrian safety improvements into those infrastructure projects. And I think this is the real goal with a lot of our green infrastructure ambitions here, but in general is how can we provide multiple benefits with the same green infrastructure. So I'm just going to dive into a few of the possible sites we've been looking at. So along Willow Pass Road here, there's a number of bus stops. There's probably about twice as many as there are here, but we've identified these from folks who have interested, but also places where there's potentially more space or potentially unique opportunities for improvements and collaboration of green infrastructure and bus improvements along the Willow Pass corridor. And we're obviously also, if people are particularly interested in other locations, both on Willow Pass and on other streets, we actually have a survey at the end that James will show you a little bit about, but where people will be able to go and feedback which of these they're interested in. But just to give you a quick overview, we've been looking at some of these locations also to give us a range of conditions or contexts around the road. And as you can see, unfortunately, at Ambrose Ave here, the two trees that were providing shade to the bus stop have now been cut down. In a lot of, and most of these conditions, there may be a bench, but there's normally not a bus stop structure or canopy, and there normally isn't other physical improvements. So just a couple of those conditions along the Willow Pass corridor. So what we'd start doing when we look at that is just looking at these conditions and saying, okay, how do they differ from one street to the other, or one bus stop to the other? Certain streets we might have, a 6-foot sidewalk or a 9-foot sidewalk, or a green median or strip that's 12 feet or 20 feet. So we start to kind of create a couple different conditions that then could possibly be repeated as well. So one of the places we were looking at the Chevron station here was pretty interesting to us because stormwater runoff can be impactful from gas stations. Also, the potential to buffer people from the gas station could be beneficial, we thought, in this case from an air quality standpoint. And so what we started to do for this site or any other ones with similar setback conditions is look at how we might optimize this right-of-way condition. So these are just really quick early concepts to get people's ideas just flowing, by no means a final design, but just to see what's possible. Because often we look at these street right-of-ways and just assume that it should be what it is because it always has been. And so in this case, we looked at that one condition and we looked at how we might be able to add a small micro plaza, we call them, that has a bus shelter that's both covered, some seating that's uncovered, vegetated buffer. So it would be a narrow hedgerow potentially between the gas station and the bus stop, and then both these larger green area bioswales for stormwater retention and trees for canopy cover. And so here you can see where starting to do this infrastructure for stormwater benefits could really start to have more of a focus on kind of creating more nicer, more habitable spaces. Another really interesting condition we saw was at Mount View Ave, which basically is a culvert that's passing under the road right here. And we thought this was an interesting opportunity to both look at how we could tackle trash that gets into the culvert, sort of the decay and erosion that's occurred in there and the potential to improve that, and address the fact that it's simultaneously a bus stop right here. So unlike other places, it does have a nice shade tree right now that is maybe not as healthy as it could be, but better than many cases. So we just looked at this condition where we've got a shade tree, and then we've got this culvert going under the road that right now is sort of run down and all trashed. And what we were really looking at is how could we make that a feature? You know, how could we do stream restoration within that channel, improve the planting so that people want to sit down and look at the creek and potentially see the water flow, and then simultaneously do stormwater interception at the street, as well as sort of provide a plaza for sitting. So I think these are just a couple opportunities of what can be done. One of the things we were intrigued by also is essentially there's a number of different conditions in the community, but in most conditions there are bike lanes painted. And like I was saying before, there's opportunities to improve some pedestrian safety issues as we design these features. For example, right now buses just pull up to the curb and bikes either have to stop behind them or kind of cut out into the road and go around the bus, which can be a little hairy for bicyclists. So sometimes what they're doing now is they're painting that strip around the bus stop and or putting out some of those plastic bollards so that bikes can pass the bus more safely. So that's one opportunity. In a number of the sites where there's a larger plantable area, another thing we can do also is instead of having our sidewalks directly at the curb where people, you know, could step out into the street easily, there's also the opportunity to put a vegetated strip and set the path back in a number of these streets too. So these are just a range of opportunities that could be considered at a few different places. And this type of condition, for example, occurs at a whole number of locations. So here, this one is not actually Chevron, so wrong side, but this is a great opportunity where there's a business here that basically employs a lot of people. If we were to build a better bus stop on this site, then it could be, for example, an incentive to have more people take the bus to work. Just to wrap things up and go into the conversation and discussion here, and we can go back to certain things if people want. Right now, we're in the process, as I said, of establishing partnerships with property owners or a city or county, in some cases, working to secure community support. The idea will be we're going to be seeking funding for this project in the next 2 to 6 months. And that said, assuming we get the money, it would then probably be another 2 or 3 years of actually working with the community to design them in more detail and build them and then do maintenance. So right now there's a number of partners that have come together to work on this. As we already introduced, Contra Costa Watershed Program, John, CCRCD, the Resource Conservation District, AMBROSE Recs and Parks has shown a lot of interest, as well as the BART, Bike East Bay, Safe Routes to Schools. So just to wrap things up, in addition to this first funding that we're going for, which is just this first item here this fall, there's also a number of other interesting funding opportunities that we're looking for. One that we've already submitted for Keller Canyon for maintenance, but also potential EPA and Caltrans grants that could fund some of the projects not fundable by the first one. So one piece too that's really exciting about the program is with all green infrastructure, a lot of what is important is actually the maintenance and stewardship of the plants and the water features. And so Contra Costa RCD has been working on an eco stewardships program where they actually staff folks, but also looking to do volunteer partnerships and partnerships obviously with other on-site folks like AMBROSE. So just quickly, next steps are really getting some of your immediate feedback here. We can look at some of the maps and get people's feedback, but we also have generated a survey so people can go online and comment on the different sites here. So we can both share this out as a link, but we can also, anyone can write it down as well, but we can share it around. So thank you.